righty. Good morning. Good morning. We're almost at the end of our study of Joseph here, and we only got 2 more weeks left, and then we'll be into a new story, which I've only skimmed through it, but I'm pretty sure we're going through Jesus' crucifixion in the next book. I gotta look at. I just saw it this morning though, so I'll know more next week. So today we're going to be still in Genesis, chapters 45, verses 1 through 3. It's been a good story so far. We've been talking about all the hardships that Joseph had to endure in his life, and that no matter how hard it gets, he's still here living a godly life, doing the right thing, and not letting the power that he's accumulated take advantage of him. Not letting him be taken advantage of by persuasion or any other things that are sure to come in the hard time. Currently, it is in the part that we're reading, and during the 7-year famine, he had been stacking up a bunch of grain, stacking that bread, and then and for 7 years, it was all good. And then for 7 years, it's going to be very bad. And so I think that they're about 2 years into the 7 during this. I think I saw that somewhere later. I'll probably touch on again. I like to jump ahead of myself. Okay, so I'll start us off with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us here today, and be with all those who couldn't make it today. I know some are out sick, and please just give them your guiding hand and get them unsick and help them and the people around them to not catch it or get it worse or just be too affected by it, my Lord. Please help us show us the things in our lives that could cause bitterness before it does cause it. Please be there in our lives to show us that the hardships aren't forever, and to not let it cause us to grow dark and to pull away from you, my Lord. Please remind us of the good times when we're in the bad, and be with us as we study your word today. And in Jesus' name, amen. So, the actions of others, like betrayal and bad decisions, can leave us very bitter because of how their choices turned our lives around. We can let bitterness continue to eat at us, or we can let it go and forgive. Forgiveness is very difficult because the memory of the hurt continues to pull us back into the bitterness. We can move beyond such destructive attitude, and the Bible gives us an example of in the life of Joseph. So I was kind of alluding to this before the camera started, but for the 2 or 3 of you that watch, and maybe some future watchers, might as well go through there. So I have had a chance to live what I preach recently. I had a nice little job offer, and it kind of got sideswiped out from under me. And in the moment, I wanted to just be bitter. I wanted to go and contact corporate. I wanted to go write up a scathing message. I wanted to just react. And took me a minute sitting there with my buddy, but I realized, it's probably for the best. It wasn't meant to be, and even though I got my hopes way up for it, the next thing's going to be better, and that's just what I got to tell myself. And then also, we're going to see how strong Joseph's forgiveness is here. And if he can forgive these people for all that stuff, then I cannot hold a grudge and forgive the issues that kept me from getting this job. So anyways, the setting is 7 years. 7 years of famine had begun, and Jacob had sent his sons to Egypt so they could buy food. However, he wouldn't allow Benjamin to go with them. Joseph spotted his brother when they arrived, but they didn't recognize him. He developed an extensive plan for having all of his brothers, including Benjamin, to meet with him personally. His plan worked, and all of his brothers found themselves in his presence, and they bowed before him. So from last week to this week, they're kind of skipping a good little portion. I wanted to go in there and read the verses, but it's kind of a lot of verses. So I guess I'll kind of just sum it up. So Joseph's family, the ones that had cast him out and sold him to the Ishmaelites, they were starting to feel the effects of this famine that was sweeping through Egypt and the surrounding lands. He had sent their kids, except for the youngest, to Egypt or to someplace in Egypt to buy some food. And I believe Joseph had saw them and started asking them questions because they looked familiar, realized, hey, I think I'm related to those people. And he actually had their silver put back into their bags. So he sent them off with free food and they got to keep their silver. And he asked them a bunch of questions and said, don't let me see you around here again unless you bring your little brother, which is kind of a little, I don't know, that'd be kind of scary for me. I feel like this, awesome Egyptian guy with all these powers is going to abduct my family, but, whatever. So they went back and they ate the food and they were happy, and then they realized that they didn't get enough food. So then the dad asked to send them back, and they told the dad that they couldn't go unless they brought their brother. And one of them stepped up and vowed to protect him and said, hey, if anything happens, blame me. And so they went back. And then Joseph had saw that they had arrived again and told them to go slaughter a animal and bring them to his temple or his house, and that they would have a feast later on. And at this point, it doesn't indicate that any of the brothers realized who he was. I imagine calling him Joseph had to have been something, but there's probably a lot of Joseph. It was probably a common name back then. So, but here we go. We'll start going through it. So, this for when the Bible meets life. It says, as kids, we could look at certain foods and be convinced it would taste bad. Some foods can surprise us. Take, for example, an apple. Nothing tastes better than biting into a delicious red apple. And nothing tastes worse than discovering your apple is quite bitter. You don't want someone snapping your picture at the moment because such bitterness caused you to wince and scowl. The face of bitterness isn't attractive, yet many people wear this face today. The bitterness that comes from the betrayal of others or of our own bad decisions can rob us of joy and prevent us from moving forward with God and others. Joseph refused to be bitter. Joseph chose to forgive his brothers and let them off the hook for what they had done to him. We too can choose to be bitter, or we can choose to be better. I always like that term. You can choose to be bitter, or you can choose to be better. I've heard that a lot growing up. So in Genesis 45, verses 1 through 3, it says, Joseph could no longer keep his composure in front of all his attendants, so he called them out. Send everyone away from me. No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brothers, but he wept so loudly that the Egyptians had heard it, and also the Pharaoh's household heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But they could not answer him because they were terrified of his presence. Yeah, I imagine getting called out by the guy who's, in a high thing of power, and then him saying, hey, you remember that guy you tossed down in the well and sold to the Ishmaelites? That's me. And so I imagine that could be a little scary. So we all have moments when our emotion overwhelms us. It can happen at the most unexpected times. Our emotions are part of God's gift to human beings. Healthy people can pay attention to their emotions and share their feelings with God and loved ones. And sometimes sharing those feelings is hard, but it really assists us when we do go out and share those feelings. Okay. Anyways, Joseph certainly had faith in God, but up to this point, he still may have struggled with bitterness at the injustice of all that happened to him. I know that I would be. His brother's disloyalty and cruelty sure must have come up to his mind frequently over the past 13 years, but seeing and hearing their changed behavior was emotionally overwhelming for Joseph. So yeah, we had talked about last time that I wasn't sure about how many years it had been, but from all this stuff, it has been quite a long ways. I think somewhere in here it said something about 20, but I guess it's closer to 13 years since everything happened. That's still a long time to be away from any of your family, any of your friends, to have to start a new life over twice, because he had his new life and then had it ripped out from under him and then built it up again. So we shouldn't be surprised that Joseph's brothers were still terrified in his presence. Moments before he had been a harsh ruler, now he spoke with the warmth and tenderness. Moments before they were strangers and outsiders, now he called them brothers. The fact that Joseph's brothers were trembling in fear reveals that their hearts weren't right with God. They had been lugging their guilt around for years, like heavy weights chained to their ankles. So it says also that his emotional release demonstrates the value of being honest about the pain we've experienced at the hands of the people who've hurt us. Pushing it aside doesn't help. Quite the opposite. Compartmentalizing the pain only deepens its damaging effect on us and opens an open wound hidden in our heart will not heal. So I think it's a very common thing to be told, even so much when I was younger, but definitely for a lot of older people or kind of more old-fashioned parents. They say to bottle it up, real men don't cry, stuff like that, all those cliches. But as we know, or a lot of us know, that bottling all that stuff up is just going to lead to a big explosion. It's going to make us resentful. It's going to make us angry. It's going to help nobody. Ain't going to help us any. And it definitely won't help the people around us. So it's a good thing to have someone to talk to, even if it's just a 1-800 number that you call to, like when you're the depressed line or whatever. The hotline, help hotline. They can't really tell you much, but they can sure listen to you. So we go into verse 1. We run the risk of stumbling into pitfalls and bitterness when we try to ignore the wounds in our heart. When we embrace our pain, we can move toward forgiving the individual or the people who wounded us. Joseph could not ignore the injury caused by what had happened to him at the hands of his brothers. The famine forced Jacob to send Joseph's brothers, less Benjamin, to Egypt to buy food for the family. Once Joseph recognized his brothers, he set in motion a series of events that would have them returning with Benjamin and in due time Jacob, his father. Joseph's strategy worked well. His brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin, and all of them had bowed before Joseph. They had no idea in the moment that the brother they sold into slavery over 2 decades previously stood before them. They only knew that he knelt before the powerful, or that they knelt before the powerful Egyptian leader who could have them executed. In keeping with his plan, Joseph threatened to keep Benjamin in Egypt. Judah mastered the courage to plead for Benjamin's release and begged Joseph to enslave him instead. That's when the feelings Joseph had locked away began to break free. Sensing he was about to lose his composure, Joseph ordered all but his brothers away. The private setting provided Joseph with the opportunity to reveal his identity to his brothers. So Joseph was going to keep one of them to make sure that they brought back old daddy. I'm sure that this big high up guy is telling you all this stuff. He's giving you good food. He's doing all these things and then tells you to bring your dad. You're kind of wondering what is all this leading to? What is this guy going to do? Is he trying to butter me up so when he takes all my stuff that he'll feel better about it? Or maybe thinking I'll feel better about it? What's going on? So he said he was going to keep one of them, and Judah, which I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure Judah was the one who pretty much conspired to throw him down in the well. He mustered the courage to plead for him to be taken instead. So that's a pretty good, if he went from selling other people into slavery to pretty much putting himself in the shoes of slavery. That's a pretty good growth there. So Joseph broke down and wept in front of his brothers in an outburst so loud that all of the Egyptians in the area had heard him. Joseph had cried over his brothers on 2 previous occasions. Once he pulled himself away and wept in solitude, and Joseph wept a second time when he saw his younger brother Benjamin for the first time in over 20 years. Again, Joseph rushed away to cry in private, then washed his face so no one would suspect he had been weeping. Now alone with his brothers, Joseph finally embraced his heartache. This time, he did not weep privately in an effort to bring his tears under control. Instead, he wept openly in the presence of his brothers. The years of private agony had ended as he opened up with them to the tears of that day. His emotional release demonstrates the value of being honest about the pain we've experienced at the hands of the people who hurt us. Pushing it aside doesn't help. Quite the opposite. Compartmentalizing the pain only deepens its damaging effect on us, and an open wound hidden in our hearts will not heal. So I think it's healthy to tell the person who put you in that trauma how you feel about it. But as you know, if you've dealt with too many traumatic people, that a lot of them don't want to admit when they're wrong or let somebody tell them how wrong they've been. So if you can tell that person, great. But if you can't, just speaking it out in general, speaking how you feel about it, how it makes you feel, it really is cathartic, and it'll help you to start moving forward from that. In verse 3, the time for healing has come. So Joseph talked with his brothers about his true identity. He wanted them to know their brothers who had been sold into slavery now stood before them. He identified himself only as Joseph. He could not have been more plain-spoken as he shared his identity. Given his experiences since the day he had been taken away from his family, he could have launched into a lengthy narrative about his life in Egypt. He could have given his account of being a slave, a prisoner, and now a powerful Egyptian leader. Or he could have chosen to delineate the details regarding the day he stood before the Pharaoh and interpreted his dreams. Joseph could have chosen to talk at length about his 2 sons and what they had come to mean to him. After all, Joseph had a captive audience composed of his brothers, and he could have said whatever he wanted to. So I think that's a good thing to point out, that, all of this trouble in his life, it's a reoccurring theme that we get when we're talking about Joseph. All the trouble in his life, and he still chooses to do the right thing. He still chooses to not let the power corrupt him. He chooses not to have his brothers shackled off and sold into slavery in an eye for an eye type thing. He still chooses to do the right thing and forgive them and try to move on from the situation, even if they might deserve a little bit of an eye for all that pain he had to go through. So what Joseph actually said shed light on what he sincerely harbored in his heart. First, he wanted them to know that he was their long-lost brother. Also, he wanted to hear about their father. He had asked about Jacob in the previous encounter with his brothers. By asking yet again, Joseph emphasized his hope that Jacob still lived. The private moment gave Joseph an opportunity for reuniting with his family. His brothers, however, perceived it as a day of reckoning. Their thoughts fixed only on the dreadful reality that they knelt before a powerful Egyptian leader who could have them tortured, killed, or both. Being in Joseph's presence terrorized them to the point that they could not answer him. Yeah, I imagine that had to be a pretty scary situation. Even having faith in God, coming up to that point, I'd be like, all right, is this the point where I'm going to have a lot of hardship? Because it seems like it's a pretty good time for it. All right, now we're on Genesis 45, verses 4 and 5. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." And they came near. "I am Joseph, your brother," he said, "the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." So Joseph chose to forgive his brothers for their cruelty. Any hard feelings were now being removed by the power of his grace. No silent treatment, no anger or revenge. Joseph was ready to fully forgive his brothers. Takes a big person to do that, especially after all of that stuff that happened to him. Forgiveness is not for the weak. This ancient moment between Joseph and his brothers should stir our modern hearts to forgive. Christian comes in all shapes and sizes, and we have various colors of skin. We have many outward differences, but our hearts were very similar. We all need to be forgiven, accepted, and loved. We long to receive forgiveness and yet struggle to give it. Even as he forgave, Joseph called on his brothers to forgive themselves. All right, so verse 4. Joseph's encounter with his brothers teaches us the value of forgiving people who have wronged us. Forgiveness gives us the opportunity to put the past behind us so that we can restore broken relationships. Joseph surely remembered how his brothers resented him because of their father favored him. Their resentment drove them to mistreat him in ways that could only be described as treacherous and merciless. Over 2 decades later, with the authority bestowed upon him by the Pharaoh, Joseph had the chance to get revenge if he wanted to take advantage of it. Instead, Joseph sought something entirely different. And with the Egyptians and nobody else in the presence of his brothers, he sought the restoration by inviting them to come closer to him. Of course, his invitation to come near allowed his brothers to get a better look at him. A closer look could confirm his identity. However, Joseph's invitation also nudged them to diminish the distance in the relationship between him and them. Oh, him and them. It seems like it's wrong. Anyways, they remembered that the last time they had seen Joseph, he had begged them not to mistreat him by selling him to the Ishmaelite traders. But this time he had their fate in his hands. With this invitation, Joseph tried to remove the fear and prompted them to misunderstand his intention. Joseph tried to remove the fear that prompted them to misunderstand his intention. By taking the initiative to nourish a sense of intimacy in the relationship, Joseph attempted to demonstrate that he forgave them. So again, he's doing all these things he's brought them into his house. He gave them free food. He fed them with a feast. And now he's trying to bring them closer so that they feel a sense of semblance and a sense of, that they're one, that he's not this great leader over them. And he does all this in the face of being so hurt. And it's just a really good message that we could take home, that, we don't have to act out, especially when we want to. So verse 5, Joseph addressed their cruelty by encouraging them to let go of their grief and anger. Their grief over what they had done could lead them to live in regret, worry, and distress. Likewise, their anger would have led them in search of someone to blame. If they persisted with their grief and anger, they would never be able to move ahead with the restoration of their relationship with him. Joseph urged them not to keep on poisoning their hearts with grief and anger. With his encouragement, Joseph showed his brothers that he had forgiven them. He could have made their lives miserable, but instead, he instructed them to dispose of their grief and anger. His forgiving heart moved him to help them so they could forgive themselves. Notice that Joseph didn't wait for his brothers to ask for forgiveness. He could have made them suffer until they reached the point they begged him to forgive them. Or he could have offered only conditional forgiveness. Instead, he forgave them completely. And his instruction to them verified the extent of his forgiveness. Definitely a stronger man than I. I would not be able to give up that easily, I feel like. But then again, 20 years later, and now I'm in a much better position. I might be a little bit more inclined to look the other way. All right. I think I'm sailing right along here since I have no one to talk to. All right, here we go. Genesis 45, verses 9 through 11. Return quickly to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You can settle on the lands of Goshen and be near me. you, your children, and your grandchildren, your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will sustain you, for there will be 5 more years of famine. Otherwise, you, your household, and everything you have will become destitute. So I'm sure that as a great leader, it probably wasn't too hard to get a bunch of land, but that is definitely that's a big ask. I'm sure. I'm sure that it wasn't just completely free for him, even though it sounds like money wasn't his problem at this point in life. But that's still a lot. And then even this is his first time seeing them in years, and he's like, "Yeah, come on, come be close to me. What's the worst that could happen? You guys throw me into another hole?" Like, that's pretty forgiving of him. But that just shows that, when we trust in God to handle the hard times in our relationships, hard times in our lives, that He usually brings about something better. In Genesis 45, verse 7, Joseph described the purpose of his great promotion in Egypt. God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and keep you alive by great deliverance. Joseph didn't view his story as that of a self-made man. He was exalted by God for the purpose of serving others. God hasn't put us on this kingdom to build ourselves up. He placed us here to build up his kingdom. And his kingdom consists of people, leveraging our talents and resources to lift others up in the most rewarding use of our time. With Joseph's promise of provision, the group headed home with joy and hope. Not only had Joseph forgiven the past, but he was committed to caring for them in the future. Verse 9, Joseph's encounter with his brother encourages us to take forgiveness one step further, to restore broken relationships by seeking what's best for those who have hurt us. Across the years that separate Joseph from his family, his love for his father never faded. Joseph's undying love for his father glimmered in his instructions to his brothers. Joseph directed them to return home quickly. He struck them on a serious note of extreme urgency for their return. His urgency had to do with the message he wanted to send his father. Joseph was alive and had been made Lord of all Egypt. Therefore, his father could rest in the assurance that he could come down to Egypt and live there in complete safety. His father's safety would be guaranteed personally by Joseph himself. Jacob should not allow indecision to delay him from relocating his family to Egypt. The family needed to make the move immediately. Verse 10, Joseph's message to his father revealed Joseph had put some thought into where his family would settle once they arrived in Egypt. He appeared to have developed a plan so that everyone could live well once they had settled into their new home. The region called Goshen was located in northeastern Egypt, and was considered the best land in the nation. Pharaoh's cattle grazed there. The rich delta soil of the region promised a secure and comfortable life for Jacob and the family. Fertile land would render a reliable harvest once the 7 years of famine passed. Joseph planned for his family to live near me. His interest in wanting his family close implied that he had made his own home in Goshen. Therefore, he personally knew the potential of the land. In addition, he implied that he wanted his father in close proximity so they could cultivate a closer relationship together. His invitation did not include his father alone. He invited his entire family to live near him. With his eagerness for his whole family to live close to him, he exhibited a heart of unconditional forgiveness. Not only did he want to provide the best land for his father, but he also offered it to his brothers and their families. And his invitation to his brothers to join their father in Goshen revealed Joseph had sincerely forgiven them. Verse 11. Joseph's plan for his family's migration to Egypt included his commitment to care for them. He told his brothers to pass along to his fathers that he would attend to their needs personally. His promise to sustain them offered yet another validation of the extent of his forgiveness. It also underscored Joseph's superlative planning skills in keeping with his trust in the Lord. His trust in God prompted him to live in the certainty that the famine would last for 5 more years. Consequently, his family would be mistaken if they thought that they could relocate to Egypt with the expectation that they could grow enough food for themselves. The famine would make such an expectation dreadfully unrealistic. However, Joseph knew he would be able to provide for them from the vast resources that he had stored away. Also, he knew that if Jacob turned down his offer to move to Goshen and live near him, the outcome would be disastrous. Before the famine ended, Jacob and his family would become destitute if they stayed in Canaan. They would live endless misery and hopeless poverty. Desire for revenge might have given unforgiving individuals permission to allow starvation to torment the people who had hurt them. In contrast, Joseph proved himself to be a forgiving person with his eagerness to protect his brothers and their families from the terrifying destitution that awaited them in Canaan because of the famine. By putting his forgiveness to work and caring for the people who had hurt him, he saved their lives. At the same time, God used him to keep his promise to Abraham. Jacob's move to Goshen guaranteed the protection of Abraham's family in keeping with God's plan for his people. Across the following years, Abraham's family in Egypt grew to become the 12 tribes of Israel. Generations later, they would return to Canaan under the leadership of Moses. So yeah, pretty good little bit there. It definitely emphasizes or drives home the forgiveness narrative. As I said before, having all that in your heart is just going to be detrimental to you and the ones around you. And even if it doesn't feel like that person should deserve forgiveness, we can always forgive and not forget. We can always keep them at a shorter distance so they can't hurt us again, but not forgiving them and still holding that resentment isn't healthy for us. It just takes time off our life and gives us stress that we don't need. So we can let bitterness continue to eat us, or we can let it go and forgive. The Bible gives us an example in the life of Joseph. His life teaches us the power of forgiveness. Consider the following actions you can take this week to do the same. Be aware. In the next few days, be mindful of moments when you feel wronged. Go immediately to God and seek grace to wipe away your hurt, which has allowed bitterness and opportunity to set in. Search your relationships. Is there someone from whom you've been withholding forgiveness? Are there friendships that seem to have grown cold? If so, consider whether you're holding on to the resentment or unforgiveness. Ask God to give you the grace and confidence to take steps toward forgiving that person or people. Reach out. Forgiveness is powerful, but it can also be difficult and take time. Connect with someone who you know is struggling to forgive in a difficult situation. Reach out in compassion and understanding. If appropriate, offer to walk with them through the process. So I guess I will wrap us up with a word of prayer, unless got any comments for me? No? Okay. Usually don't, but maybe. All right. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us together and allowing us to listen to the story of Joseph some more. To see that no matter what life throws at us, we still have the power to forgive and the power to keep following your path and doing right. Please allow us the chance to see where we give the forgiveness and where we can help other people to forgive. Please be with us in helping to deal with the own cruelty that happens in our lives and not letting it turn us bitter, and to help others with the cruelty that they have endured and help them become not so bitter or not so enraged at it. Help them find forgiveness. Dear Lord, I ask again that you be with all those who weren't here and heal them up and get them back to us. Be with John and his physical therapy and help him get better and back to us. And as we go into the sanctuary to listen to the pastor's words, help that touch our souls and give us something to think about this week. I thank you for all you do in my life, Lord. And in Jesus' name, amen. All right. One more week of this one, and then we're on to the next.